Thank you all for being here. My name is Yo. Today, I'm delighted to be here and present to you our paper, Learning to Persuade on the Fly, Robustness Against Ignorance. It's a joint work with Chris Iyer from the University of Minnesota and Haifeng Xu from the University of Virginia. So first, let me give you some motivations of our work. Platforms often share information with their users to persuade them to take actions that result in desirable outcomes. For instance, Etsy promotes individual sellers by putting an axis peak here. Or Expedia shares demand information, like we can see here, it says this hotel and apartments are in high demand. So to make good recommendations, the platform may need to know these distributions like the seller's quality distribution or the demand distribution. But in practice, platforms usually do not know these distributions. So the central question we want to answer in this talk is, how can the platform share persuasive information when this underlying distribution, such as the seller quality distribution or demand distribution, is unknown? Our approach is sort of a learning theoretic approach to study this repeated persuasion. And in particular, our contribution is an learning algorithm that makes persuasive recommendations with high probability and achieves optimal regrade against the benchmark where the platforms knows this underlying distribution. And our main idea is to use robustness to compensate for ignorance of the distribution. But before I go into details about it, let me firstly talk a little bit about the related work. But for the sake of the time, I won't go into details. But first, our work fits right into learning and mechanism design, and I list a few that is closely related to our work. Because our approach relies on robust persuasion, there's a lot of work in this area. And our work also has the learning theoretic framework because in particular, the no distribution setting can be thought of or formulated as a linear program. So our work also relates to the online linear programming. Further in the persuasion we propose has some relationship with the online learning under safety constraints. Then let's move on to the model. So we studied a repeated persuasion problem between a single long-lived sender, which corresponds to the platform in the example I provided at the beginning, and a stream of receivers who are corresponding to the users. Where at each time t, we assume that only the sender can observe the state realization. After that, the sender recommends an action to the receiver. The receiver who cannot see the state realization then chooses an action upon receiving the action recommended by the sender. Finally, both the sender and the receiver get the payoff that is relevant to the state realization and the action chosen by the receiver. We assume that the receiver is myopic and the sender cares about the total payoff that is achieved through the time horizon. Then let me briefly talk about our benchmark where the distribution is known to the sender and the receiver. This is a static setting where at each a payoff relevant state is distributed as the distribution mu star. And before the state is realized, the sender commits to a signaling mechanism which maps the state to a distribution of action recommendations. So in particular, given that the realized state is omega, what is the probability for the sender to recommend an action A? The question we may ask is that how does the persuasiveness mean in this non-distribution setting? We say that a signaling mechanism is persuasive on the distribution mu star if, having received the action recommendation, the receiver's expected utility is maximized by choosing the recommended action A over other actions A prime. So if we expand this expectation, we would get a linear constraint, which is linear in the signaling mechanism. Here, note that this linear inequality requires the knowledge of the distribution mu star. So it might be a challenge if we don't know the distribution mu star. And we denote the set pers mu star to be the set of all the persuasive mechanisms on the mu star. And it is straightforward that this set is convex, non-empty polytope. We also write down the sender's expected utility as a linear function, which is linear in the signaling mechanism. Therefore, we see that this optimal mechanism in the non-distribution setting can be obtained by solving an LP, where we maximize the sender's expected utility with respect to the distribution mu star and require the signaling mechanism to be persuasive under mu star. And we let the optimal star denote the optimal objective value of this LP. Then let's go back to the unknown distribution setting, where in this setting, with mu star unknown, at each time t, before the state is realized, the sender commits to a signaling mechanism. And once the state is realized, the sender recommends action according to the chosen signaling mechanism. So in this setting, a signaling algorithm is just a sequence of the signaling mechanism, which maps history at any time to the signaling mechanism. So we can ask the same question, that how does the persuasiveness mean in this unknown distribution setting? Well, there are a few ways to modeling this persuasiveness condition. So the first is that at the end of the time horizon, all the chosen signaling mechanism until time t are persuasive under the eventual empirical distribution gamma t. This might be a reasonable condition in the unknown distribution setting, because at the end of the time horizon, if there is a requirement for verification, the sender can check back, see if all the chosen signaling mechanisms are persuasive with respect to the eventual empirical distribution. Or we can make it more stronger, says that at any time point, all the historical signaling mechanisms must be persuasive with respect to the current empirical distribution. So this is a stronger guarantee because the sender at any time can verify if the previous signaling mechanisms are all persuasive under the current empirical distribution. So both are reasonable conditions, but we show that they are equivalent to the third condition, which says that all the chosen signaling mechanisms are persuasive with respect to the unknown distribution mu star. So this is what we want to pose for the persuasiveness condition. So formally, we say that a signaling algorithm is beta persuasive if with probability at least 1 minus beta, all the chosen signaling mechanisms are persuasive under the unknown distribution for all time. We also write down the regret of the algorithm to be the difference between the optimal sender's payoff under the no distribution versus the payoff of the algorithm. The goal is to find a signaling algorithm that is small o1 persuasive and has a sublinear regret of the time horizon. Our main result is a theorem saying that there exists a signaling algorithm which under some regularity condition is beta persuasive and has the regret of the order square root t log t with high probability. Then let me present you our algorithm, robustness against ignorance. So this algorithm is basically saying that at each time, we choose a neighborhood to be an L1 ball around the empirical distribution with some radius. And then we commit to this signaling mechanism that is the optimizer of a robust problem. And I would explain details of what exactly this robust problem is. But recall that in our benchmark, the no distribution setting, the optimal signaling mechanism can be obtained by solving an LP. But here the challenge is this mu star is unknown. So our idea is to solve a robust problem where we maximize the sender's expected utility with respect to the empirical distribution gamma t. But we require the signaling mechanism to be not only persuasive under the empirical distribution, but also persuasive for all distributions in the neighborhood around the empirical distribution. So formally, this PERS-BT is the set of the signaling mechanism that is persuasive for all distributions in this neighborhood. So from the description of this algorithm, we can immediately see that this algorithm is beta persuasive, where the 1 minus beta is just the probability where all the neighborhood contains the true distribution mu star for all time. And given this, we then split the regrade into two parts. The first part is the estimation error between gamma t and mu star. The second part is what we defined as the cost of robust persuasion. So this cost of the robust persuasion captures the difference between the optimal sender's payoff under some distribution mu versus the optimal sender's payoff if we require the signaling mechanism to be robustly persuasive. So this gap has a very nice property. It balances the trade-off between the persuasiveness and the regrade. So the larger size of the neighborhood, the algorithm is more likely to be persuasive, but the regrade would be larger in that case. So the question we may ask is that how does this gap depend on the size of the neighborhood? Well, first note that in general, even a little robustness can be costly. We show this by a construction of an instance where, like, no matter how small the neighborhood is, the gap is a positive constant. So we say that without any restrictions, the regrade can be linear in the time horizon. Therefore, we must need some regularity conditions. So this regularity condition here is essentially saying that for each action A, the set of the beliefs for which action is optimal for the receiver should have a non-empty interior. So this is somewhat analogous to the Slater condition for duality and convex optimization. Under this regularity condition, we show that this gap is linear in the size of the neighborhood. The proof is by an explicit construction of a robust signaling mechanism that is simultaneously persuasive for all distribution in the neighborhood. So recall that the size of the neighborhood balances the trade-off between the persuasiveness and the regrade. And we show that by choosing the size of the neighborhood, the radius epsilon t to be proportional to 1 over square root t, it can optimally balance the trade-off between the persuasiveness and the regrade. Then our main theorem is that this robustness against ignorance algorithm is beta persuasive and has regrade of the order square root t log t with high probability. Well, finally, let me briefly summarize our work. We studied a repeated persuasion setting and relaxing a strong assumption of the standard model of the Bayesian persuasion. We provide a persuasive algorithm, robustness against ignorance, which has the regrade of the order square root t log t and is computationally efficient. We also prove a matching lower bound up to log t terms on any algorithm, even with weaker persuasive requirements. As a byproduct, we characterize the cost of the robust persuasion. That's all for this talk.